Imagine waking up one morning to discover that the world's largest Bitcoin exchange, the place where nearly every crypto transaction on Earth was happening, had suddenly vanished. Its website went dark, user accounts were empty, and 850,000 Bitcoin, worth billions, had simply disappeared. No warning, no explanation, just a digital black hole where the future of money was supposed to be. It's one of the greatest mysteries in financial history. A story of ambition, negligence, and perhaps quiet conspiracy. The Mt. Gox hack wasn't just a crypto heist. It was a warning, one that predicted almost every failure we've seen since. From FTX to Celsius to the endless cycle of exchanges collapsing under their own weight. But what really happened at Mt. Gox? How does nearly 7% of all Bitcoin that will ever exist just vanish? And more importantly, where is it today? Let's rewind to the very beginning. Before Mt. Gox was a Bitcoin exchange, it had nothing to do with crypto at all. The year was 2007. A programmer named Jed McCaleb, who would later go on to co-found Ripple and Stellar, created a website called Magic, the Gathering Online Exchange. The idea was simple: a trading platform for digital magic cards. The name was shortened to Mt. Gox. Simple, catchy, harmless. But the card trading idea fizzled out, and McCaleb left the site dormant until 2010, when he discovered Bitcoin. Bitcoin was this strange, open-source project with barely any infrastructure. If you wanted to buy it, you basically had to find someone on a forum and wire them money. So McCaleb thought, why not use Mt. Gox as an exchange for Bitcoin instead? He retooled the code, rebranded the site, and launched what would become the first major Bitcoin marketplace. It was chaotic. There were no regulations, no KYC, no government oversight. Just a handful of idealists and curious tech people trading magic internet money for dollars. But it worked. And that's when the story really began to accelerate. By 2011, Mt. Gox was handling over 70% of all Bitcoin transactions worldwide. It was the center of the Bitcoin economy. If you owned Bitcoin, you probably bought it on Mt. Gox. The new owner, Mark Karpeles, a French programmer living in Tokyo, had bought the site from Jed McCaleb in 2011. Mark was brilliant, but also disorganized, eccentric, and maybe a little naive. He ran Mt. Gox out of a modest Tokyo office with just a handful of employees, using code that was never built to handle billions of dollars in digital currency. And that code had problems. In June 2011, Mt. Gox experienced its first major hack. Someone got access to a user's credentials and used them to sell a massive amount of Bitcoin, crashing the price from $17 down to 1 cent. Panic ensued. Trading was halted. The exchange recovered. But the cracks were already showing. Still, Bitcoin mania was spreading. The price soared from a few dollars to over $1,000 by late 2013. And Mt. Gox was printing money, millions in daily volume. On the surface, it looked like a triumph. Underneath, though, something was very wrong. By 2013, Mt. Gox was struggling behind the scenes. Bank accounts were being frozen due to regulatory issues. Withdrawals were delayed. Customers were complaining they couldn't get their money out. Yet Mark Karpeles kept assuring everyone, everything's fine, but it wasn't. Unknown to almost everyone, including Mark himself, allegedly, Mt. Gox had already been compromised for years. Hackers had found vulnerabilities in the exchange's system as early as 2011. They'd gained access to the hot wallet, the digital storage where Mt. Gox kept Bitcoins for daily transactions. And over time, they were quietly siphoning Bitcoin away. Not all at once, but little by little, like termites eating away at the foundation of a house. By mid-2013, the hole was enormous, but invisible. Mt. Gox's database still thought it had hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin. In reality, those coins were long gone. And the irony? Every time Mt. Gox tried to fix bugs, perform updates, or send withdrawals, it made things worse. The more users panicked and tried to withdraw their coins, the faster the illusion unraveled. Then, in early 2014, the truth began to surface. February 7, 2014. Mt. Gox suddenly halted all Bitcoin withdrawals, citing a technical issue. The issue, they said, was something called transaction malleability. In simple terms, this was a quirk in Bitcoin's design that could, in theory, allow a hacker to slightly alter a transaction's ID, making it look like the withdrawal never happened, even though it did. At first, it sounded like a technical hiccup, but soon the story unraveled. A leaked document, called the Crisis Strategy Draft, appeared online. It claimed that Mt. Gox had lost all of its Bitcoin holdings. 850,000 coins. Gone. Valued at about $473 million at the time, and tens of billions today. Shortly after, the website went offline. The office in Tokyo was empty, and Mark Karpeles? Silent. The global crypto community went into shock. Bitcoin's price fell nearly 40% in days. People were furious. Some had lost their life savings. Others blamed Karpeles directly, accusing him of fraud, incompetence, or worse. Eventually, Mt. Gox filed for bankruptcy. The world's biggest Bitcoin exchange had imploded, and no one could say exactly why. But the real story was even stranger. When the dust settled, investigators began digging into Mt. Gox's records. What they found was chaos. The company had no proper accounting. Wallets weren't labeled. Passwords were shared among employees. Some backups were missing entirely. It wasn't even clear which Bitcoins belonged to customers and which belonged to the company. Mark Karpeles was arrested by Japanese authorities in 2015 and charged with embezzlement and data manipulation. But even after years of investigation, one question remained. Where were the coins? The first big clue came in March 2014. Karpeles announced that he had found 200,000 Bitcoins in an old format wallet that hadn't been used in years. It was a bizarre twist. How do you find $100 million sitting on a hard drive? But it happened, and it suggested that not everything was lost. So, what about the remaining 650,000 Bitcoins? That's where the mystery deepens. Blockchain analysis later revealed that the stolen coins had been moving, slowly, methodically, through thousands of transactions. Some went to exchanges. Some were mixed through tumblers to hide their origin. Others sat dormant for years. Eventually, investigators traced much of the activity to one name: Alexander Vinnik, a Russian national accused of laundering stolen Mt. Gox Bitcoin through a service called BTCE, another exchange that would later be seized by U.S. authorities. Vinnik denied direct involvement, but the evidence suggested that BTCE had handled a significant portion of the stolen coins. To this day, much of that Bitcoin remains lost, scattered across anonymous wallets or seized in law enforcement actions. But every once in a while, blockchain watchers see it move again. Small fragments of the Mt. Gox stash, drifting through the network like digital ghosts. The Mt. Gox collapse was catastrophic for early Bitcoin. It erased trust, destroyed fortunes, and made regulators around the world take notice. But it also triggered a transformation. In the wake of Mt. Gox, new exchanges like Coinbase, Binance, and Kraken emerged, promising more transparency, better security, and regulatory compliance. Cold wallets became standard practice. Multi-signature authentication became the norm. Lessons had been learned, or so it seemed. And yet, history kept repeating itself. In 2022, FTX collapsed in almost the same fashion. Billions missing, executives in denial, investors betrayed. Celsius, Voyager, Quadriga CX, each echoing the same core problem. Centralized platforms handling decentralized money with centralized greed and incompetence. The difference? Mt. Gox was a failure of ignorance. FTX was a failure of intent. But the result was the same. Trust broken, users wrecked, regulators circling. So, Where are those 850,000 bitcoins today? Of the original total, about 200,000 were recovered and are now controlled by a Japanese bankruptcy trustee. For years, this trustee, Nobuaki Kobayashi, has been responsible for managing those coins and eventually reimbursing Mt. Gox's former customers. In 2023, after nearly a decade of legal wrangling, progress finally came. The trustee began preparing repayments to creditors, both in fiat and Bitcoin. The process is slow, complicated, and heavily monitored, but it's happening. As for the rest, around 650,000 Bitcoin remain missing. Some likely went through BTCE and were liquidated years ago. Some might still be sitting in inaccessible wallets, lost forever if the hackers lost their private keys. And some may have been mixed and redistributed so many times that they've effectively disappeared into the bloodstream of the blockchain itself. Today, those missing coins, if they still exist, would be worth tens of billions of dollars, enough to move markets, enough to rewrite financial history. When you zoom out, Mt. Gox wasn't just an isolated failure. It was the prototype for every major crypto collapse that followed. Each one starts the same way. A revolutionary idea, a charismatic founder, and a promise of financial freedom. Then comes the growth, fast, unsustainable, euphoric. Behind the scenes, risk piles up. Poor accounting, inadequate security, and misplaced trust. And finally, the implosion. Mt. Gox was 2014, Bitfinex in 2016, Quadriga CX in 2019, FTX in 2022. Different faces, same pattern. It's easy to laugh at the early days, at the messy code and missing coins. But Mt. Gox wasn't just a hack. It was a warning about what happens when technology outpaces responsibility. When pioneers build empires on enthusiasm instead of infrastructure. And the most ironic part? The Bitcoin network itself was never hacked, not once. Every collapse came from human failure, from the way we built systems around Bitcoin, not from Bitcoin itself. So what are the takeaways? What did we really learn from the Mt. Gox disaster? First, trust the math, not the middleman. Bitcoin was designed to eliminate intermediaries, yet people kept handing their coins to centralized exchanges. Mt. Gox reminded the world that if you don't hold your private keys, you don't truly own your Bitcoin. Second, transparency is security. In traditional finance, audits and regulations create accountability. In crypto, transparency comes from the blockchain itself, but only if people use it. The Mt. Gox collapse showed how opacity, even in a transparent system, can destroy everything. Third, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. Every new wave of technology invites the same old human flaws: greed, neglect, and overconfidence. Mt. Gox, FTX, and whatever comes next all share the same DNA. The names change. The lesson doesn't. In a strange way, Mt. Gox's failure helped Bitcoin survive. It forced the community to grow up, to build better systems, better security, and a stronger philosophy about self-custody. But there's still a haunting truth beneath it all. 850,000 Bitcoins, a piece of digital history, are still missing, locked somewhere in the blockchain, waiting. And every time an old Mt. Gox wallet stirs, the world holds its breath. Maybe one day we'll know who really took them. Or maybe, like so many fortunes throughout history, they're gone forever. A monument to human error in the age of digital gold. So before you trust another platform, another founder, another promise, remember Mt. Gox. Remember that even in a decentralized world, human failure is the one thing no code can fix. If you found this story insightful, hit like, subscribe for more deep dives into financial mysteries, and let me know in the comments. Do you think the missing Mt. Gox Bitcoin will ever be found? Because until they are, the mystery isn't over.